The Browning M2, .50 caliber machine gun, stood undeniably as the most formidable infantry weapon deployed by the United States throughout the entirety of World War II. When stabilized on a stationary tripod, this monumental piece of ordnance allowed a proficient gunner to pierce the robust engine blocks of enemy vehicles from distances reaching 800 yards. Its potent rounds could systematically tear through the metallic fuselages of aircraft at a staggering 1,000 yards, unleashing a torrent of 450 rounds per minute with an unnerving, almost surgical degree of precision. This raw power, coupled with its pinpoint accuracy from a fixed position, solidified its reputation as a battlefield changer, a true force multiplier against both ground and aerial threats. However, the impressive capabilities of this very same weapon underwent a dramatic transformation when it was affixed to the M31C pedestal mount of a Willys MB Jeep, especially when that vehicle was careening at 40 miles per hour along a deeply rutted Philippine supply route. The moment this potent machine gun was subjected to such dynamic conditions, it effectively devolved into nothing more than a cumbersome 700-pound piece of inert metal, utterly incapable of hitting even the most obvious target, metaphorically unable to strike a barn from the interior. The fundamental flaw, it became glaringly clear, was not inherent to the Browning M2 itself. The weapon had unequivocally demonstrated its unparalleled efficacy and reliability across every major theater of conflict, from the arid expanses of North Africa to the snow-laden forests of the Ardennes. The true culprit, the source of this debilitating inaccuracy, resided solely in the design of its mounting system, specifically the M31C pedestal, a rigid 32 PB steel post that was directly socket-welded to the Jeep S chassis, positioned just behind the passenger seat. In an ideal theoretical scenario, this particular configuration was intended to furnish American reconnaissance units with a critical advantage, mobile firepower, enabling them to engage threats while on the move. Yet, in the harsh crucible of practical application, this setup regrettably provided them with a weapon that violently vibrated, incessantly rattled, and indiscriminately sprayed its formidable rounds in an unmanageable, cone-shaped pattern that spanned approximately 15 degrees, the instant the driver so much as brushed the accelerator pedal. One might vividly imagine a gunner, grimly bracing himself in the rear of a Jeep, hurtling down a treacherous jungle path amidst the intense fighting of March 1945. The M31C pedestal, by its very design, offered absolutely no dampening or absorption of vibration. Consequently, every jarring pothole encountered, every subtle thrum of the engine, and even the most minute steering correction made by the driver was directly and unmitigatedly transmitted through that unforgiving steel post surging straight into the weapon is a receiver. Compounding this external assault was the Browning, as own internal violence, its reciprocating bolt, a substantial 17-pound steel block, slammed back and forth an astonishing 13 times per second, generating its own distinct and powerful harmonic frequency. When this intense internal oscillation was combined with the relentless external road shock, the result was a weapon system rendered utterly incapable of maintaining a stable sight picture for more than a fleeting half-second. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. This significant operational flaw was not entirely unknown to military authorities. The official Army Technical Manual 9.15.2-1-310 originally disseminated in February 1943, did indeed acknowledge this critical limitation, albeit in a remarkably understated manner. Its recognition was confined to precisely 3 sentences, almost deliberately obscured within the dense text on page 127, stating, "Accuracy degradation is expected during vehicular movement. Gunners should engage targets from stationary positions when possible. Sustained fire while mobile is not recommended for precision engagement." The implicit, yet stark translation of these official directives was unequivocal. Any machine gun mounted on a moving vehicle served primarily as a decorative or intimidating accessory, its practical utility for accurate engagement wholly dependent on the complete cessation of the Jeep's motion. This issue transcended the realm of mere inconvenience. By early 1945, it had evolved into a critical tactical impediment. American forces operating in the Pacific Theater were deeply engaged in conducting swift, mechanized patrols through Japanese-occupied territories, where the act of stopping a vehicle, even momentarily, frequently equated to an immediate and fatal vulnerability. Convoys, by their very nature, desperately required the capacity for suppressive fire while in transit, the ability to rake enemy positions along tree lines, to strike at the narrow apertures of fortified bunkers, and to compel hostile crews to remain hidden as the column pressed onward through perilous ambush zones. A weapon system that mandated a full vehicle halt before it could effectively engage a target was not merely inefficient or problematic. It was, in the brutal calculus of combat, worse than useless, representing a clear and present tactical suicide for those who relied upon it. Gunnery Sergeant William Mercer, a soldier attached to the 1st Cavalry Division, reconnaissance platoon on the island of Luzon, meticulously chronicled the profound frustration engendered by this problem in his after-action report, dated February 12, 1945. His account starkly detailed an encounter where his unit engaged enemy machine gun position at approximately 200 YD while vehicle in motion, expended 87 rounds, 0 observed hits, vehicle halted, engaged same target stationary, neutralized position with 23 rounds. The mathematical implications of his report were utterly damning, revealing a staggering waste of nearly 4 times the necessary ammunition, with effectiveness only achieved once the vehicle was brought to a complete standstill. The United States Marines engaged in equally fierce island-hopping campaigns across the Philippines and Okinawa confronted an identical dilemma. Their Jeep-mounted 50 caliber weapons, while capable of generating intimidating noise and compelling enemy infantry to seek cover, consistently failed to deliver reliable, lethal force while in motion. In a theater of warfare, where every single yard of advancement was purchased with the precious commodity of human blood, an inaccurate and unreliable support weapon was not just a source of profound frustration. It was, in a very real sense, a criminal negligence of duty. Staff Sergeant Raymond Cupp, the man destined to revolutionize this aspect of mobile warfare, possessed a background far removed from the conventional path of military engineering. He had never enrolled in ordnance school, nor had he delved into the intricacies of mechanical design, much less perused a physics textbook beyond his high school years. Instead, Cupp hailed from a rural upbringing outside Terre Haute, Indiana, a farm kid whose formative teenage years were largely devoted to the practical arts of repairing tractor suspensions and ingeniously jury-rigging plow hitches, often out of necessity when his father lacked the financial means to purchase proper replacement parts. It was precisely this unique foundation in agricultural improvisation, this deep-seated resourcefulness born of necessity, that would soon provide a pragmatic solution to a complex engineering challenge that had conspicuously eluded the dedicated professionals of the Army Ordnance Corps for a full 2 years. Cupp's arrival in the Philippines coincided with that of the 37th Infantry Division in January 1945, where he was assigned the critical role of gunner on a reconnaissance jeep. Within his inaugural week of demanding patrol duty north of Manila, he had expended a staggering 1,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, yet by his own candid admission, he had failed to strike a single target he had aimed at. This profoundly disheartening experience gnawed at him. His mind frequently drifted back to his Indiana farm, where he could effortlessly navigate his venerable farmall tractor across a freshly plowed field, all the while maintaining a surveying rod perfectly steady in its rudimentary, improvised rear mount. A fundamental question began to crystallize in his mind. If he could achieve such stability with agricultural machinery, why was the formidable United States Army incapable of maintaining a steady machine gun on a platform specifically designed for weapons? The pivotal moment of realization for Cupp arrived on February 23, 1945, during a chance observation of a Sherman tank crew meticulously attending to their vehicle's suspension system. He noted how the tank's bogie wheels, the robust road wheels that made direct contact with the ground, were each mounted on independent vertical coil suspensions. These massive coils were engineered with the express purpose of absorbing significant impacts and effectively damping out pervasive vibrations before they could propagate into the main hull of the tank. Cupp found himself mesmerized by these springs, staring intently for a full 20 minutes, a profound idea slowly taking root. He then returned to his own jeep, examining the M31C pedestal with entirely fresh, discerning eyes. The stark contrast was immediate and undeniable. The pedestal was rigidly fixed, uncompromisingly, unforgivingly rigid. It served as a direct conduit, transferring every single iota of kinetic energy from the road's jarring imperfections straight into the delicate mechanics of the weapon. A singular, transformative question formed in his mind. What if it wasn't so rigid? Over the subsequent 4 days, Cupp embarked on an intensive quest to acquire the necessary materials for his burgeoning invention. His resourcefulness was exemplary. He salvaged 2 robust compression springs from the seat assembly of a wrecked 2.5-ton truck, each spring possessing a substantial rating for approximately 200 pounds of vertical load. He then ingeniously requisitioned a 5-foot section of half-inch steel pipe from a combat engineer unit, shrewdly claiming that the pipe was urgently needed for the prosaic repair of tent poles. Further demonstrating his knack for unconventional procurement, he bartered 2 cartons of Lucky Strikes cigarettes to a Navy CB welder in exchange for a crucial hour of acetylene torch time. Lastly, with a touch of audacious pragmatism, he borrowed, without official permission, a sheet of 1/4-inch steel plate from a supply depot's pile of damaged goods, ensuring he had all the components for his innovative design. The design Cupp conceived was a testament to elegant simplicity and practical genius. He meticulously cut the acquired steel pipe into 4 distinct sections, which he then expertly welded vertically around the very base of the existing M31C pedestal, thereby fashioning a robust, square-shaped cage. The lower end of each of these pipe sections was securely welded to a foundational steel plate which was then firmly bolted directly to the Jeep S-frame. Conversely, the upper end of each pipe section was welded to a second steel plate, this one serving as the direct support for the pedestal itself. Crucially, nestled between these two plates, precisely within each pipe section, Cupp carefully installed one of the salvaged compression springs. With this ingenious modification, the M31C pedestal was no longer rigidly bolted to the vehicle frame. Instead, it now effectively floated atop 4 independent spring-loaded columns, providing a critical buffer against shock and vibration. The underlying physics governing Cupp's invention were fundamentally agricultural in their origin rather than derived from complex military engineering theory. He had, in essence, crafted a colossal shock absorber, employing the identical principle found in his tractor's spring-mounted seat, the strategic isolation of the working component, in this case the machine gun, from its primary source of disruptive vibration. Under this new system, the relentless road shock would compel the springs to compress, which would then in turn expand back to their neutral state, effectively transforming the harsh, sharp impacts into a far smoother, profoundly dampened motion. While the formidable recoil of the M2 would naturally persist, the innovative spring-mounted platform would now absorb a significant portion of that energy, preventing it from feeding back destructively into the vehicle frame, and thereby circumventing the creation of a detrimental feedback loop that had plagued the original design. On March 1, 1945, Staff Sergeant Cupp conducted the inaugural test firing of his newly modified mount on a stationary Jeep. The weapon functioned flawlessly, cycling its rounds without incident. The springs visibly compressed slightly, with each burst of fire, then resiliently returned to their original position, confirming the structural integrity of his design. That very afternoon, he successfully persuaded his squad leader, Sergeant First Class Jack Delaney, to permit a more audacious test, firing the weapon while the Jeep was in motion. They embarked on a half-mile circuit through an abandoned sugarcane field, traveling at a steady 30 miles per hour, as Cupp skillfully discharged controlled bursts at a predetermined marked tree. The resulting shot grouping, while not absolutely flawless, represented an unprecedented improvement. For the very first time, a gunner could actually observe his tracer rounds steadily progressing toward the target, rather than wildly spiraling into unpredictable arcs. Delaney promptly halted the Jeep, proceeded to the tree, and meticulously counted 17 impacts clustered within a 2-foot circle at a range of 150 yards. He then turned back to Cupp, his expression a compelling blend of profound amazement and a hint of trepidation. "That thing's not regulation," he declared, his voice firm. "We're using it anyway." The fundamental reason behind the unequivocal success of Cupp's ingenious modification, and conversely, the underlying cause of the Army, standard mount, abject failure, can be precisely attributed to a phenomenon known as resonant frequency amplification. Although it is highly improbable that anyone within the 37th Infantry Division would have employed such specialized terminology, this scientific principle accurately describes the destructive forces at play within that Jeep every time a gunner engaged the trigger while the vehicle was in motion. The Browning M2 as bolt assembly, a substantial component weighing 17 pounds, travels approximately 6 inches backward with each individual shot, cycling at an approximate rate of 450 rounds per minute during sustained fire. This translates to an internal operating frequency of roughly 7.5 cycles per second, or 7.5 hertz. Simultaneously, a Willys MB Jeep traversing a typical Philippine roadway at 40 miles per hour would generate vertical frame oscillations ranging between 8 and 12 hertz, depending on the specific road conditions encountered. The most severe resonance, however, invariably occurred around 9.5 hertz, particularly when the vehicle encountered regularly spaced ruts or washboard surfaces. When two distinct vibration sources operate at similar or closely matched frequencies within a system that is rigidly connected, their energies do not counteract each other. Instead, they constructively amplify, making the combined vibration far more intense and destructive. This is the very same principle that enables a soprano's precisely pitched note to shatter a wine glass. The Jeep's inherent frame vibration and the machine gun's internal recoil vibration were sufficiently close in their respective frequencies to generate this constructive interference, thereby exacerbating the overall movement to a degree far more severe than either source of vibration could produce independently. Remarkably, an engineering study conducted at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in November 1943, a full 9 months before Staff Sergeant Cupp had even been deployed overseas, had precisely identified this identical problem. The findings were documented in a test report explicitly marked for internal review only. This confidential report unequivocally recommended the development of a vibration isolation mount that would incorporate elastic dampening elements specifically designed with a natural frequency below 4 hertz in order to effectively prevent detrimental harmonic coupling. However, this critical recommendation, despite its potential to save lives and enhance combat effectiveness, languished in a filing cabinet. The primary reason cited for its non-implementation was the immense logistical and industrial challenge it presented. Executing the proposed solution would have necessitated a complete retooling of production lines across no fewer than 23 distinct ordnance facilities nationwide, a bureaucratic hurdle deemed too formidable to overcome during wartime. Sergeant Cupp's ingenious, albeit improvised, spring mechanism for the gunner's platform exhibited a natural frequency of approximately 3.2 hertz, a characteristic precisely aligning with the specifications previously articulated by the engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground, derived from intricate calculations of dimensions and load capacities. Yet this remarkable congruence was not the product of Cupp's theoretical computations. Rather, his understanding stemmed from a deeply practical, intuitive grasp of mechanics. Just as tractor seats required pliable springs to absorb the jarring impacts of uneven terrain, so too did his gunner's position demand a similar cushioning effect to ensure stability and mitigate the relentless vibrations inherent in mobile combat, thus providing a smoother, more effective operational environment for the heavy machine gun. The secondary and equally critical challenge addressed by Cupp as modification concerned the formidable issue of recoil mitigation. The M2 machine gun, upon each discharge, unleashed a potent force of roughly 1,800 FTLB of recoil energy. The conventionally deployed M31C pedestal mount, regrettably, acted as an unyielding conduit, channeling the entirety of this immense energy directly into the Jeep's chassis. This energy, in turn, was then transmitted with equal force back into the weapon through the rigid mounting. thereby establishing a detrimental feedback loop. The consequence was severe. When engaging in a rapid 5-round burst, the weapon would already be visibly oscillating by the third shot, still reeling from the recoil energy of the first round that had rebounded through the vehicle's frame. By the time the 5th shot was fired, the gunner found themselves contending with 3 distinct recoil waves cyclically interfering with one another, rendering the sight picture so violently unstable it was akin to attempting to aim through a chaotic maelstrom. Cupp's innovative spring mount, however, was designed to absorb a substantial portion, approximately 40%, of this kinetic recoil energy through the controlled compression and subsequent expansion of its springs. This absorbed energy was effectively dissipated as thermal energy within the spring metal itself, rather than being permitted to rebound and exacerbate the weapon's instability. This phenomenon, known as hysteretic damping, is precisely the principle that underpins the remarkable efficacy of automotive suspension systems in delivering a smooth ride by converting kinetic energy into heat. While the remaining 60% of the recoil energy still imparted movement to the weapon, the crucial absence of feedback amplification rendered this movement far more manageable. The gun would gently rock back on its springs, swiftly settle into a stable position, and be prepared for the subsequent shot without the persistent, disruptive vibrations that plagued the standard setup. A third, frequently overlooked dimension to this problem involved the human element, the gunner themselves. When operating a weapon affixed to a rigid mount, a gunner instinctively battles every jarring vibration and movement with their own musculature. This constant, strenuous effort invariably introduces additional, unpredictable movements into the aiming process, fundamentally compromising accuracy. Cupp's ingenious floating mount, in stark contrast, significantly diminished the need for such exhaustive muscular correction, as the sophisticated spring system efficiently absorbed and managed the gross, disruptive movements of the weapon. Consequently, the gunner was liberated to concentrate their efforts on making precise, fine aim adjustments, rather than expending precious energy and focus wrestling with an uncooperative weapon. Decades subsequent to its initial deployment, rigorous testing, conducted at the esteemed Army Research Laboratory, would conclusively quantify this profound advantage. These studies definitively demonstrated that spring-isolated weapon systems exhibited an impressive 35% reduction in gunner-induced movement when compared to their rigidly mounted counterparts, simply because the operator was no longer engaged in a ceaseless, fatiguing cycle of overcorrection. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The profound irony nestled within Cupp's design was its lack of absolute originality and fundamental principle. Historically, the French military had engaged in experimental endeavors with spring-isolated machine gun mounts as far back as 1918. And German engineers had similarly incorporated rubber isolation bushings into the mounting systems of some of their aircraft guns during the intervening decades. However, the vital transfer of institutional knowledge rarely traverses the chasm between successive conflicts or across distinct branches of military service. By the year 1945, the prevailing conviction within the American Army was that rigid mounts inherently offered superior stability for crew-served weapons. Cupp, through his practical innovation, definitively disproved this entrenched belief, demonstrating with compelling clarity that true stability and mere rigidity are not synonymous. His work underscored the often counterintuitive truth that on occasion the most steadfast and stable platform is precisely the one that is engineered to permit a degree of controlled movement. The inaugural combat evaluation of Kupp's ingeniously modified mount unfolded on March 8, 1945, during a reconnaissance sweep, advancing eastward from San Fernando. Kupp's squad, positioned third within a 5-jeep column, was traversing a verdant coconut plantation when Japanese infantry abruptly unleashed fire from a cleverly concealed position situated approximately 200 yards to their left flank. Conventional military doctrine dictated that the convoy should immediately halt, personnel dismount, and then engage the enemy. However, the column commander, First Lieutenant Anthony Brucia, made a bold, unconventional decision. He issued orders for the jeeps to maintain their speed and returned suppressive fire as they maneuvered through the perilous kill zone. Notably, Kupp's jeep was the sole vehicle in the column equipped with the newly modified mount. The gunners in the other 4 jeeps, utilizing their standard M31C pedestals, unleashed sustained bursts that merely shredded palm fronds, kicked up plumes of dirt, and, in essence, achieved negligible tactical impact. Kupp, in stark contrast, discharged 3 meticulously controlled bursts, totaling 22 rounds, and succeeded in placing 8 of those rounds directly through the enemy position's frontal cover. The immediate result was the instantaneous death of 2 Japanese soldiers, prompting the remainder of the enemy force to withdraw in disarray before the convoy had even fully cleared the ambush zone. Crucially, the American forces sustained 0 casualties. That very evening, Lieutenant Brucia meticulously drafted his after-action report. The pertinent section, reflecting the profound impact of the engagement, stated unequivocally, Staff Sergeant Kupp's modified weapon mount demonstrated marked improvement in accuracy during mobile engagement. Request ordnance evaluation for possible wider implementation. This compelling request was subsequently forwarded to the 37th Infantry Division as Ordnance Officer, Captain Leonard Hartman, who on March 11th drove out to personally inspect Kupp's jeep. Hartman's reaction was both immediate and entirely predictable, steeped in bureaucratic adherence. He declared that the modification constituted a clear violation of 3 distinct sections of Army Regulation 758 pertaining to unauthorized alterations of issued equipment. Consequently, he issued a direct order for the springs to be removed and the mount to be restored to its standard, regulation-compliant configuration. Sergeant Delaney, Kupp's squad leader, responded to Captain Hartman's directive with a resolute defiance, instructing the ordnance officer to simply file his paperwork while ensuring the springs remained precisely where they were. This act, however, was not born of outright insubordination, but rather represented the profound, unspoken compact that frequently existed between the pragmatic realities of frontline soldiers and the administrative imperatives of rear echelon officers. Captain Hartman was at liberty to compose whatever official reports he deemed necessary, but Sergeant Delaney's men would unequivocally utilize any equipment that demonstrably enhanced their chances of survival. In this critical balance, the springs remained firmly in place. News of Kupp's innovative mount spread with a velocity that far outpaced the sluggish pace of official military channels. By the close of March, 3 additional reconnaissance units within the 37th Division had independently constructed their own versions of Cupp's mount, resourcefully utilizing scavenged materials. The 1st Cavalry Division, operating approximately 30 miles to the north, received intelligence of this ground-breaking modification through the informal soldier-to-soldier grapevine and promptly dispatched a warrant officer to conduct a thorough examination of Cupp's Jeep. This officer meticulously recorded measurements, captured photographs, and acquired a spring sample, which he then transported back to his unit, say motor pool. Within a mere 10 days, the 1st Cavalry Division had successfully equipped 6 of its Jeeps with similar locally fabricated modifications, underscoring the rapid adoption rate of this field-proven enhancement. The first truly quantitative combat data regarding the modified mounts emerged from the 7th Infantry Division on Okinawa in April 1945. Major Douglas Sinclair, who commanded a mechanized reconnaissance company, had proactively authorized his gunners to construct Cupp-style mounts after receiving enthusiastic endorsements from a recently transferred sergeant. Major Sinclair, a meticulous record keeper, had been diligently tracking ammunition expenditure against confirmed enemy kills since January, primarily to justify his persistent requests for increased allocations of .50 caliber ammunition. The figures he compiled were stark and undeniable. Between April 12th and April 28th, his company engaged 23 separate targets, while their vehicles were in motion. Jeeps equipped with the standard mounts averaged an astonishing 187 rounds expended for each confirmed enemy casualty. In stark contrast, Jeeps outfitted with the modified mounts averaged a mere 44 rounds per casualty, representing a monumental 76% improvement in ammunition efficiency, a metric that directly translated into significantly enhanced combat effectiveness. Major Sinclair's comprehensive report encompassed an element even more invaluable than raw statistics: direct gunner testimony. Corporal Edwin Marsh, articulating the profound impact of the modification, wrote, "Can actually see where rounds are going now. Can walk fire onto target instead of just hoping something connects. Makes you feel like you're doing your job instead of making noise." That final sentiment carried immense weight. Combat effectiveness is not solely predicated on the mechanical performance of weaponry. It is inextricably linked to the confidence and psychological state of the combatant. Gunners operating the modified mounts consistently reported feeling significantly more capable and proficient, an empowerment that, in turn, fostered greater aggression and decisiveness in engagement, ultimately culminating in their heightened overall effectiveness on the battlefield. By May 1945, the modified mounts had proliferated to at least 17 distinct units dispersed across Luzon, Okinawa, and Mindanao, spreading entirely through informal soldier-to-soldier channels. This widespread adoption occurred as soldiers meticulously constructed copies based solely on descriptions provided by comrades who had personally witnessed the original innovation. Despite this undeniable field success, the Army's official stance remained steadfast. These modifications were unequivocally unauthorized and deemed potentially hazardous. Meanwhile, the tangible results of actual combat operations irrefutably demonstrated that Cupp's illegal mount was saving both lives and precious ammunition in roughly equivalent measure. Given this irreconcilable divergence between bureaucratic protocol and battlefield reality, a direct collision between the two forces was by then absolutely inevitable. This anticipated bureaucratic collision manifested dramatically in the form of a priority telegram that arrived at General Walter Kruger, 6th Army Headquarters, on May 19, 1945. The urgent message originated from the office of the Chief of Ordnance in Washington, having been routed through Manila, and its tone was remarkably blunt and uncompromising for official military correspondence. It unequivocally stated that multiple field units were reporting unauthorized modifications to the M31C pedestal mount, and the Ordnance Department demanded that these modifications be ceased immediately, pending a full safety evaluation. The telegram explicitly cited serious liability concerns, raised pointed questions regarding structural integrity, and warned of the potential for catastrophic failure during sustained fire. It concluded with a stark directive: identify the source of the modification and confiscate all non-standard equipment without delay. This uncompromising directive placed General Kruger in an untenable and impossible position. His forces were then 2 months deep into the arduous and grinding campaign to eradicate the remaining pockets of Japanese resistance from the Philippine archipelago, consuming ammunition at rates that were already severely straining existing supply lines. Simultaneously, his reconnaissance units, those very soldiers engaged in the perilous, ambush-prone patrol work and suffering the highest casualties, were reporting with fervent conviction that Cupp's modified mounts had, for the first time, rendered their weapons truly functional and effective. And now Washington was demanding that he strip these life-saving modifications from his troops and compel them to revert to equipment that every soldier in the theater knew to be woefully inadequate. Kruger, demonstrating the pragmatic leadership that has characterized effective commanders throughout military history, chose to stall. On May 22nd, he dispatched a reply stating that field evaluation of the reported modifications was ongoing and that the removal of equipment during active combat operations presented an unacceptable operational risk. This calculated response successfully bought him crucial time, yet it fundamentally failed to resolve the profound underlying problem. The Ordnance Department's insistence on rigorous safety testing was, in a vacuum, entirely justifiable. It was undeniably true that unauthorized field modifications had, on tragic occasions, resulted in the deaths of soldiers when improvised welds failed catastrophically, or makeshift components shattered under the immense stresses of combat. The core question, however, was whether the imperative of stringent testing requirements should inherently override the compelling and undeniable data regarding proven combat effectiveness, particularly when lives hung in the balance. Colonel Thomas Riss, serving as the 6th Army's Chief Ordnance Officer, found himself grappling with a profound internal conflict, caught between two divergent imperatives. On one hand, his paramount responsibilities encompassed ensuring the safety of all equipment and upholding the rigorous standards of supply chain standardization, undeniably critical aspects of his professional mandate. Yet he was also privy to Major Sinclair's revealing Okinawa report, which detailed an impressive 76% surge in ammunition efficiency attributed to a particular modification. Furthermore, direct conversations with numerous gunners unequivocally confirmed the enhanced performance of these altered weapon mounts. Consequently, on May 28th, he put forth a judicious compromise to initiate accelerated field testing, leveraging the 6th Army's own substantial resources. The plan involved meticulously documenting the resultant data and subsequently forwarding comprehensive recommendations to Washington. His proposal stipulated that if these trials demonstrated the modifications to be both safe and effective, then official adoption would be vigorously pursued. Conversely, if any issues surfaced, the modifications would be rescinded, supported by conclusive data justifying the decision. The rigorous testing protocol unfolded over a 2-week period, commencing on June 2nd and concluding on June 15th at the 6th Army Ordnance Depot, situated just outside Manila. Engineers meticulously prepared 6 jeeps for the evaluation, outfitting 3 with the innovative cup-style modifications and the remaining 3 with standard M31C pedestals. These vehicles were then subjected to a series of identical demanding trials designed to record critical metrics such as accuracy data, structural stress measurements, and any potential failure modes. The comprehensive course encompassed various challenging conditions, including precision firing on smooth roads, sustained engagement over rough terrain, continuous fire tests involving 200 rounds without interruption, and extreme stress scenarios incorporating intentional frame-jolting obstacles. The comparative results proved unequivocally disparate. The modified mounts consistently exhibited a 71% tighter shot grouping when operating at speeds exceeding 25 MPH, a figure strikingly congruent with Major Sinclair's earlier combat data. Subsequent structural analysis revealed an impressive absence of weld failures, no spring fractures, and no instances of frame stress surpassing normal operational limits. The solitary reported malfunction occurred when a test gunner deliberately over-tightened the mount bolts, resulting in a cracked base plate, an incident definitively classified as user error rather than a design flaw. Captain Robert Yamaguchi, the engineer tasked with overseeing this extensive evaluation, concluded his official report with remarkable candor and an unusual degree of directness. His unequivocal statement declared, "The modified mount is superior to standard equipment in every measurable category. Recommend immediate theater-wide implementation." Promptly on June 18th, Hendricks transmitted Captain Yamaguchi's compelling report to General Kruger. Accompanied by a strong endorsement advocating for the official authorization of the modification and formally requesting Washington's approval for its widespread field production. General Kruger, recognizing the merit, affixed his approval and swiftly escalated the matter through the established command hierarchy to General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Command. What followed was an inevitable period of anticipation as the report navigated the labyrinthine channels of military bureaucracy, progressing, as is often the case, at a pace that could only be described as geological. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic in the interim. Despite the grinding gears of official approval, soldiers across the theater persisted in fabricating the innovative mounts. By late June, the ingenious modification had propagated extensively, transcending its initial deployment within reconnaissance units to reach military police convoys, forward artillery observers, and even some tank destroyer crews who adeptly adapted its underlying principle for their .50 caliber coaxial mounts. The proverbial genie had been irrevocably released from its bottle. Washington held the power to sanction it, reject it, or simply ignore its existence. But the modified mounts themselves had become an entrenched reality, immutable due to their proven efficacy and the widespread endorsement of the soldiers who relied upon them. They simply worked, and the troops knew it. The long-awaited official response materialized at last on July 3, 1945, a full 6 weeks after General Kruger's preliminary deferral, and precisely 3 months following Sergeant Cupp's pioneering welding of the very first prototype. The War Department issued an authorization for the conditional deployment in the field of spring-isolated pedestal mounts, contingent upon a forthcoming formal design review and the subsequent development of detailed specifications. Essentially, this meant that units were permitted to utilize these enhanced mounts, but they were explicitly cautioned not to anticipate any official supply chain support or logistical backing for the foreseeable future. The War Department's provisional authorization inadvertently created a peculiar logistical conundrum. While units were indeed permitted to employ the modified mounts, the Army itself declined to produce them, refrained from issuing any official installation instructions, and offered no provisions for replacement parts. This unusual directive meant that every single spring-isolated mount deployed across the vast Pacific theater had to be fabricated locally, utilizing any available materials and the ingenuity of their personnel. For the dedicated ordnance companies and resourceful motor pool sergeants stationed throughout the Philippines and Okinawa, this challenging task effectively became the primary summer endeavor of 1945, a testament to their adaptability and resourcefulness. The 86th Ordnance Company, based in Tacloban, notably assumed the pivotal responsibility for standardizing the fabrication process. Their commander, Major Harold Wexler, astutely recognized that while battlefield improvisation was perfectly adequate for outfitting 1 or 2 jeeps, such ad hoc methods were entirely inadequate for widespread theater-encompassing deployment. Commencing in mid-July, Major Wexler's dedicated team embarked on a meticulous reverse engineering effort, transforming Cupp's original design into a comprehensive blueprint for manufacturing. Their work involved precisely measuring spring rates, thoroughly documenting welding procedures, meticulously creating detailed dimensional drawings, and establishing practical material substitution guidelines to be utilized whenever ideal components were simply unavailable. By July 28th, the 86th Ordnance Company had finalized a comprehensive 16-page mimeographed instruction booklet titled Provisional Modification Instructions, M31C, Pedestal Mount Spring Isolated Configuration. This manual ingeniously transformed the challenge of material scarcity into an intrinsic aspect of its design philosophy, rather than viewing it as a hindrance. For instance, if standard truck seat springs were unobtainable, the manual enumerated 6 viable substitute spring components, including repurposed aircraft landing gear parts, 105mm howitzer recoil assemblies, and even bed frame springs, provided they were doubled up for sufficient strength. In situations where a qualified welder was not available, the manual included detailed brazing instructions, adaptable for use with equipment typically found in any motor pool. Furthermore, the prescribed steel pipe sections could be substituted with angle iron, square tubing, or, in extreme necessity, even hardwood, though the manual prudently noted that wooden mounts would necessitate replacement every 6 weeks due to susceptibility to stress fractures. Its dissemination was facilitated by the very same unofficial channels and informal networks that had been instrumental in spreading the original modification. Resourceful motor pool sergeants diligently copied the manual and readily passed it on to neighboring units. A chaplain en route to Okinawa thoughtfully carried a dozen copies in his duffel bag, distributing them to ordnance companies upon his arrival. One crucial copy eventually found its way to the 24th Infantry Division in New Guinea, where an ingenious lieutenant duplicated an additional 30 copies and ensured their distribution throughout his regiment. By early August, various versions of this invaluable manual were known to exist in at least 40 separate locations across the vast Pacific Theater, and fabrication efforts were underway wherever individuals possessed access to a welder and a supply of scrap metal. The actual manufacturing processes exhibited a vast spectrum of refinement. The 51st Ordnance Company, operating on Luzon, established an impressive assembly line capable of producing 4 complete mounts per day, leveraging standardized jigs and dedicated welders. They attained an impressive degree of uniformity, with their mounts being practically interchangeable components. Conversely, the 127th Infantry Regiment on Mindanao relied on a single corporal with rudimentary proficiency in welding, who constructed mounts one at a time, adapting each configuration to whatever materials were readily available. While his mounts proved functional, no two looked precisely alike, and any necessary replacement parts required custom fitting for each specific installation. Quality control measures were similarly ad hoc and improvised. Some units conscientiously conducted full test-fire evaluations before officially declaring a mount operational and fit for duty. Others simply bolted the modifications onto their vehicles and relied on optimistic expectation. Failures, though infrequent, did occur. Springs that cracked after a mere 50 rounds, welds that separated under operational stress, and base plates that bent when encountering particularly rough terrain. However, the overall failure rate was remarkably minimal, likely attributable to the design's inherent straightforwardness in its mechanical principles and its endowment with generous safety tolerances. A spring engineered to withstand 200 pounds of force had no difficulty supporting a 60-pound gun and effectively absorbing its recoil. Similarly, the welds holding a gun mount were never stressed anywhere near their breaking point during normal operational use. By August 15, 1945, the pivotal day Japan declared its capitulation. The 86th Ordnance Company's meticulously kept records indicated that 847 modified mounts had been successfully installed on jeeps throughout the Pacific Theater. This figure, however, only accounted for units that bothered reporting their installations to the 86th. The actual total was probably closer to an estimated 1,200. The modified mount had thus transformed from a single sergeant's improvisation into a theater-wide equipment upgrade in less than 6 months. Remarkably, without a single official procurement contract, without a penny of dedicated funding, and without formal approval until the modification was already pervasive. The profound incongruity of this situation was not unobserved by the service members engaged in the work. Corporal James Dietrich, a welder attached to the 542nd Ordnance, articulated this sentiment in a letter to his brother in August, writing, "We're building gun mounts. The Army won't pay for to fix a problem the Army says doesn't exist. And every gunner who gets one treats us like we invented fire. I've learned more about how the Army really works in 3 months than I did in 3 years of following regulations." That profound lesson concerning the true mechanisms of military innovation would ultimately demonstrate greater longevity than the mounts themselves. While the spring-isolated mount did not cease to exist with the conclusion of World War II, its evolutionary path grew increasingly obscure once the active combat operations ceased. The majority of the jeep-mounted modifications were dismantled during the post-war equipment turn-ins, subsequently welded apart for their scrap metal value, or simply abandoned in motor pools across the Pacific as units rotated home. The Army's official stance remained steadfast. These were merely provisional field expedients, not permanent pieces of equipment. Yet, the fundamental tenet that weapons platforms necessitate vibration isolation to preserve accuracy during movement had been conclusively substantiated in combat conditions that no peacetime test could ever fully replicate. The initial formal acknowledgement emerged in 1948 when the Army finally issued Technical Bulletin TBRD 984, aptly titled Vibration Isolation for Vehicle-Mounted Crew-Served Weapons. Buried within the document's appendices was a spring mount design that appeared strikingly reminiscent to anyone who had served in the Pacific Theater. While the spring rates were indeed different, having been meticulously determined by professional engineers, as opposed to being estimated through battlefield expediency, and the materials were specified procurement items rather than scavenged components, the essential structural concept remained undeniably faithful to Cupp's original ingenuity. 4 spring-loaded posts effectively isolating the weapon mount from the vehicle frame's pervasive vibrations. Notably, the bulletin made no mention of Cupp by name, offered no reference to the wartime field modifications, and provided no acknowledgement that soldiers had been actively utilizing this exact solution for 3 years, while ordnance engineers were supposedly developing it. While the initial concept of a stabilized weapon mount for vehicles may have originated from battlefield necessity, it was the Korean War that truly propelled this ingenious principle into more widespread military application. The M38 Jeep, a robust successor to the revered Willys MB of World War II, was offered with an optional factory-installed 50 caliber machine gun mount, officially designated the M66C. This advanced system incorporated sophisticated engineering compared to earlier improvisations, utilizing coil springs meticulously housed within sealed tubes and complemented by rubber bushings to provide additional damping. This design, though considerably more refined than the truck seat springs Sergeant Cupp had employed years prior, served the exact same fundamental purpose: to absorb kinetic energy and stabilize the weapon. Indeed, official gunnery manuals published in 1951 explicitly highlighted the M66C mount's remarkable ability to facilitate accurate suppressive fire, even when the vehicle was in motion at speeds reaching up to 35 km/h, a vital operational capability that Cupp had pioneered through sheer ingenuity 6 years earlier, despite the Army's initial classification of such modifications as unauthorized. The Vietnam War witnessed a further evolution of this crucial concept, notably through the emergence of the formidable gun trucks. These were essentially standard cargo vehicles, specifically the 212-ton M35s and the heavier 5-ton M54s, that convoy security units ingeniously armored and equipped with an array of multiple machine guns. Their primary mission was to provide robust protection for supply routes against ambushes and hostile engagements. By 1968, the integration of spring isolation into the gun mounts on these modified trucks had become a standard, albeit highly localized, practice. The specific designs, however, displayed significant diversity reflecting the individual ingenuity and available resources of the units fabricating them. For instance, the gun trucks of the 523rd Transportation Company famously incorporated readily available automotive coil springs into their mounts, demonstrating resourceful adaptation. In contrast, the 8th Transportation Group showed a preference for the robust performance of aircraft shock struts, repurposing components from a completely different domain. Meanwhile, the 39th Transportation Battalion engineered its mounts using resilient rubber torsion elements, cleverly salvaged from the landing gear of helicopters. Despite these varied implementations and the diverse origins of their components, the underlying engineering principle remained consistently identical: the imperative to isolate the weapon from the vehicle's inherent vibrations, thereby mitigating a significant source of inaccuracy that would otherwise render effective targeting nearly impossible. We hope you are finding this exploration insightful. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We would be grateful for your like and subscription. We also encourage you to share where you are from and what you think about this fascinating topic in the comments below. Intriguingly, formal military engineering efforts throughout this period consistently lagged behind the practical innovations emerging from the field. During the 1970s and 1980s, official Army mounts designed for vehicle-borne weapons largely maintained relatively rigid configurations, offering only minimal provisions for vibration isolation. This persistent design conservatism meant that soldiers on the ground continued to take matters into their own hands, modifying their equipment using readily available springs, resilient rubber bushings, and various improvised damping systems. Their motivation was clear: the officially issued equipment simply did not perform adequately under combat conditions. The vital institutional knowledge that Sergeant Cupp had so effectively demonstrated, the fundamental truth that any weapon deployed on a moving platform absolutely requires an isolated mount to achieve reliable accuracy, was repeatedly rediscovered by each subsequent generation of soldiers who faced the challenging task of engaging targets from dynamic, moving vehicles. The ultimate and undeniable validation of this long-held field wisdom finally manifested with the introduction of the M153 Crows, or Common Remotely Operated Weapon Station, which commenced deployment on Humvees in 2007. Crows represents a pinnacle of modern military technology, a sophisticated computerized turret system that empowers gunners to precisely aim and fire their weapons from within the relative safety of the vehicle's interior, utilizing advanced camera systems and intuitive joystick controls. The intricate engineering underpinning CROs incorporates state-of-the-art gyroscopic stabilization, precise digital fire control mechanisms, and virtually every technological advancement one would expect from 21st century military hardware. Yet subtly integrated within the system's comprehensive technical specifications lies the critical mounting interface, a spring-isolated platform augmented with active damping capabilities. This design is specifically engineered to counteract and prevent vehicle vibrations from degrading the weapon's accuracy, thereby ensuring optimal performance. In essence, the ingenious principle that Sergeant Cupp had painstakingly welded together in a Philippine motor pool decades ago is now exquisitely implemented with cutting-edge servo motors and advanced computerized stabilization. But its fundamental purpose remains precisely the same. While contemporary military engineers might accurately assert that the stabilization technology inherent in CROWs draws its lineage from sophisticated naval gun mounts and advanced aircraft turret systems. A direct tracing of the specific evolution of vehicle-mounted weapon isolation within the U.S. Army undeniably leads back to the reconnaissance jeeps of 1945. It points to a singular sergeant who possessed an intuitive understanding that truly stable platforms need not necessarily be rigidly fixed. Raymond Cupp, a man who never received formal recognition for his innovation, whose name never graced an official technical manual, and who likely never comprehended the profound impact his improvised mount would have on weapons system design for the ensuing 70 years, nevertheless left an indelible legacy. Every gunner who has successfully engaged a target from a moving vehicle since 1945, whether consciously aware of it or not, owes a measure of that success to his foundational insight. Raymond Cupp's compelling narrative is far from an isolated incident in the annals of military history. Rather, it embodies a recurring pattern of innovation. Consider the bazooka, a revolutionary anti-tank weapon, which was famously conceived by a captain who boldly disregarded the skepticism of the Ordnance Department and constructed a functional prototype in his own garage. Similarly, effective body armor, capable of stopping rifle rounds, did not originate from official procurement specifications, but rather from ingenious field modifications made by soldiers to the inadequate vests initially issued to them. The upper-moored Humvees that eventually provided much-needed protection to convoy crews in Iraq were initially unauthorized modifications, painstakingly welded together by motor pool sergeants using scavenged scrap metal and ballistic glass from damaged vehicles. In each of these instances, the critical solution emerged directly from soldiers' willingness to circumvent regulations, driven by the undeniable truth that survival inherently outweighed strict compliance. This pervasive tendency highlights a profound paradox embedded at the very core of military innovation. Armies are, by their fundamental nature, hierarchical institutions that operate on principles of stringent standardization, meticulous regulations, and rigidly authorized procedures. These structures are established for entirely valid reasons. When tasked with coordinating hundreds of thousands of personnel across multiple continents, there is an absolute necessity for standardized equipment, predictable supply chains, and universally followed procedures to ensure coherence and effectiveness. However, this very standardization, while essential for order, simultaneously engenders an institutional inertia that actively resists change, even when such change is desperately and urgently required. The elaborate procurement system, which guarantees that every soldier receives the same reliable rifle, paradoxically also ensures that any improvement to that rifle necessitates navigating years of exhaustive testing, intricate approval processes, and protracted budget negotiations. Frontline soldiers, however, operate under a fundamentally different set of constraints and priorities. Their immediate concerns are not supply chain logistics or complex procurement regulations. Instead, their paramount focus is whether their equipment functions effectively right now, under the precise and often brutal conditions they are confronting today. When that equipment demonstrably fails, when machine guns prove incapable of hitting targets from moving jeeps, when body armor provides insufficient protection against the actual rounds being fired at them, or when vehicles lack adequate defense against the specific threats they encounter, soldiers will invariably take it upon themselves to rectify the problem. They do so by utilizing whatever materials and skills they can improvise, driven by an innate survival instinct that overrides established institutional processes. This phenomenon is a consistent feature in every conflict throughout history. The most astute military organizations recognize this inherent dynamic and proactively establish formal channels designed to capture these vital field innovations before they proliferate too widely outside official control. For example, the British Army during World War I maintained specialized trench workshops where soldier-invented tools and weapons could be rigorously evaluated and, if proven useful, rapidly produced for wider distribution. Similarly, the German military in World War II actively encouraged unit-level modifications and deployed dedicated liaison officers whose role was to meticulously document successful field expedients for potential broader adoption. While these systems were by no means perfect, they unequivocally acknowledged the undeniable reality that soldiers would innovate regardless of official authorization. Therefore, the strategic imperative was to harness that creativity rather than expend futile effort fighting against it. In stark contrast, the American military in 1945 possessed no such formalized system for capturing grassroots innovation. This absence directly explains why Sergeant Cupp's ingenious mount disseminated through informal networks for months before headquarters even became aware of its existence. By the time any official evaluation process finally commenced, hundreds of soldiers had already independently adopted the modification, relying on nothing more than persuasive word-of-mouth reputation and direct observation of its tangible, life-saving results. The institutional system, in this instance, operated in reverse. Widespread adoption preceded official approval, and that approval only materialized because the modification had already become too pervasive to suppress effectively. This serves as a powerful illustration of innovation occurring despite the institutional framework, rather than being facilitated by it. Beneath these specific examples lies a profounder truth about the true sources of problem-solving. Raymond Cupp was not a formally trained engineer, nor was he an ordnance specialist, nor was he anyone the institutional army would have specifically tasked with improving weapon mounts. He was, at heart, a farm kid who possessed an innate understanding of springs and vibration, gleaned from years of fixing tractors. The critical insight that ultimately solved a pervasive military problem thus stemmed from his agricultural experience, not from specialized military expertise. This pattern recurs constantly. Truly critical innovations frequently emerge from individuals who apply knowledge drawn from completely unrelated fields precisely because they are not constrained by conventional thinking or by how things are supposed to work within a specific domain. An expert exclusively focused on vehicle-mounted weapons might never conceive of borrowing solutions from tractor suspensions, given that tractors are not weapons. However, an individual who possesses an understanding of both tractors and weapons can forge connections and insights that specialists confined to their narrow expertise invariably miss. Modern militaries continue to grapple with this identical paradox today. The procurement system, regrettably, has become even slower and more encumbered by bureaucratic processes, with average development timelines for new equipment now often stretching to an astonishing 15 or 20 years from the initial statement of requirement to actual fielding. Concurrently, conflicts in regions such as Iraq and Afghanistan generated urgent and immediate operational needs: enhanced IED protection, effective counter-drone systems, and reliable encrypted communications that could function effectively in complex urban terrains. These pressing demands simply could not await solutions that would take 2 decades to materialize. The inevitable outcome was yet another wave of unauthorized field modifications, swiftly followed by a frantic institutional effort to legitimize and mass-produce what soldiers had already ingeniously built for themselves out of necessity. The overarching lesson to be drawn from these experiences is not that regulations are inherently detrimental, or that soldiers should habitually disregard established procedures. Indeed, unauthorized modifications can introduce significant dangers, create logistical nightmares for supply chains, and potentially lead to catastrophic failures that cost lives. Rather, the fundamental lesson is that an inherent gap will always exist between the capabilities of issued equipment and the evolving needs of soldiers on the ground. Creative individuals, driven by necessity, will perpetually endeavor to bridge that gap, irrespective of what regulations dictate. The critical question for military institutions, therefore, is whether they choose to actively suppress that innate creativity, strategically harness it for collective benefit, or simply feign ignorance until its manifestations become impossible to overlook. Sergeant Cupp's pioneering mount conclusively demonstrated that the latter option is demonstrably ineffective. Soldiers will innovate, whether officially authorized or not, and the most prudent course of action for any military organization is to recognize genuinely good ideas quickly enough to formally adopt and integrate them before they become so widespread that they force institutional approval retrospectively.